Chapter 12. The dragon has one more move. This wasn't about rebuilding anymore. Not really. Rebuilding implies starting again, laying foundations, choosing bricks, drawing plans. But Danny had already done that, again and again, and every time the same truth surfaced. Old bricks don't build new towers. They carry old weight, old fractures, old intentions that no longer match the gravity they're being asked to hold. The ground level mind fortress wasn't asking to be rebuilt now. It was asking to be maintained, refined, reinforced, brought into alignment with what had already been revealed. Lee had done her part. She didn't steady him. She didn't soothe him. She knocked down the wall. The illusion wall. The one that diffused the light. The one that made the moon feel like a concept instead of a force. When it fell, the lunar glow didn't arrive. It had always been there. What changed was that nothing stood between Danny and its pull anymore. And the snake dog's placement remained. Still in the tower, because that tower, the one people imagine as stone stacked neatly upward, was never stone at all. That's just how human minds shrink things they don't know how to picture. This tower was cosmic. It generated gravity. It created orbit. It explained why people arrived without invitations and left without conflict, why some stayed tethered for years and others burned up on entry. It wasn't built to house random relationships. It was built to test resonance. And now it was wobbling. Danny's room sat at the top, just above the throne room where ego lived. Not ruled, lived, contained. From there he could feel it, the subtle shift, the recalibration of pull, the way certain orbits no longer held and others tightened without effort. When a tower like this destabilizes, it doesn't collapse in rubble and noise. It sheds. Pieces that no longer belong lose their grip. Alignments that were temporary complete their arc and fall away. What remains isn't emptiness. It's clarity. This is where most people panic. This is where they scramble to grab what's falling, trying to save pieces that were never meant to be permanent. But dragons don't cling. They assess. And Danny could finally see it for what it was. He wasn't meant to rebuild the tower the same way. He wasn't meant to replace who fell away. He wasn't meant to force new weight into old frames. His one remaining move wasn't construction. It was infrastructure. Strengthening the unseen, stabilizing load paths, reinforcing the systems that allow gravity to exist without collapse, boundaries instead of walls, resonance instead of recruitment, maintenance instead of conquest. This wasn't the end of the game. The board had already changed. The pieces that mattered were still standing, and the dragon, battered, grieving, stripped of crown and certainty, finally understood something vital. He didn't need to win. He needed to hold. And for the first time since the fall, the fortress wasn't asking him to fight. It was asking him to stand still and let the remaining structure tell him what it was always built to become. Now it becomes clear. Not in hindsight, but in pattern. It was the chaotic snakes who smashed the wall, not out of malice, not out of intent, but because that was the only force configuration strong enough to break it. And it was Ellen and Kat who revealed where it was going to break. They didn't swing the hammer. They didn't light the fuse. They didn't even necessarily know what they were pointing at. That's how it always works. No one knows their role in the play while they're playing it. They just follow the script written into their nature, unwillingly, unconsciously, faithfully, simply by being exactly who they are. Snake intuition doesn't announce itself. Dragon language doesn't explain itself. They just notice. And in noticing, they expose fault lines. So when the wall finally shattered, it wasn't chaos that was revealed. It was the moon. Moonlight doesn't illuminate like the sun. It doesn't flatten shadows or burn away detail. It shows what the sun cannot see. The hairline fractures, the stress points, the places where structure has been holding by habit instead of strength. That glow fell across the infrastructure of the mind fortress and made one thing unmistakably clear. This wasn't about conquest anymore. The sun had already done its job, building, expanding, asserting, surviving. But the sun can't see inward-facing weaknesses. It can't reveal what only becomes visible in stillness, grief, and night. And this is where his mother's death mattered in a way nothing else could have. Because her leaving when she did ensured something critical. Danny would not rush to conquer the moon. He would not try to land on it. He would not mistake it for a destination. If his mom were still alive, there would always be the risk, subtle, unspoken, that he would search for a mother figure in the moon, that he would project comfort, safety, reassurance, and unconditional holding outward into orbit, into another person. That's the irony. While she lived, replacement was imaginable. When she died, replacement became impossible. She was no longer a role. She was no longer a function. She became irreplaceable. And that ended the search permanently. Psychologically, this is where many people fracture. They confuse grief with longing. They confuse loss with absence. They look for mothers and lovers. They look for fathers and leaders. They look for safety and intimacy instead of within structure. But that option was removed from Danny entirely. The moon could never be a mother now. It could only be a mirror. Not something to be possessed, not something to be landed on, not something to be conquered or claimed, something to orient by. And that distinction matters, because the moon doesn't nurture like a parent. It regulates tides, it governs rhythm, it pulls without touching. With the wall gone, with the moon revealed, with the sun no longer blinding the view, Danny could finally see which parts of the infrastructure needed reinforcement, not expansion. And for the first time in the entire saga, there was no confusion about what the moon was asking. Not comfort, not replacement, not rescue, just alignment. And that is a far harder lesson for a dragon than any battle ever was. On the outside, stripped of metaphor, stripped of myth, stripped of romance, it looked like this. Another reset, another rearranging of reality, another time where Danny and Lee had to reorganize their entire circumstance. Not because they wanted to, not because it made sense, but because they were tied together now, permanently, by blood, by responsibility, by consequence. That snake dog was never going to disappear. And that's important to say plainly. A snake dog doesn't vanish when a relationship ends. It observes, it guards, it remembers. There is possessiveness there. Not romantic, not sexual, territorial in a way that has nothing to do with desire and everything to do with shared offspring. The psychology of we made this life together doesn't dissolve just because love does. It lingers, it watches, it stays in the background. Alert, suspicious, protective. Lee would never be fully removed from the equation, nor should she be. What truly shifted was Pip, because now Pip was his full responsibility in a way she never had been before. There was no mom to fall back on anymore, no maternal safety net, no elder hand ready to catch him if he slipped. And strangely, painfully, the timing mattered. If his mom had gone when Pip was younger, there would have been no hope. Danny would have drowned trying to be everything at once. But Pip wasn't a child anymore. She was older, a teenager tipping into adulthood, a girl becoming a woman. And the difference is crucial. Pip didn't need Danny in the way young children need a parent. She didn't rely on him to survive. She had a mom, a stepdad, a household, a structure of her own. What she needed from Danny was something else entirely: escape, perspective, magic. She needed him to take her out of the ordinary, not anchor her deeper into it, to pull her sideways into imagination, into fantasy, into worlds where possibility still breathes. She needed proof, not explanation, that reality isn't all there is. And this time, there was no tiger, no steady, grounded presence to take half the weight, no external force to share the load. This one was on Danny alone, and he did what dragons do when it matters. He didn't explain magic. He proved it. Not with speeches, not with belief systems, not with ideology, with presence, with effort, with shared moments that meant realities just enough for wonder to slip through. And Pip responded. Something in her recognized it. Something in her leaned toward it. And inside the mind fortress in the garden, the tree responded. It blossomed, it grew. Not because the storm had passed, not because the world had become safe, but because for the first time since his mother's death, Danny wasn't trying to survive. He was showing another human being that magic is real. And that is when the roots finally took hold. This is where the sun finally shows its necessity. Not its ego, not its dominance, but its function. Because without the sun, nothing in the garden grows. Boo Bear, Bam. Those trees were still there, still rooted, still alive, still growing quietly beneath the surface, whether Danny was present or not. The garden never forgot them. And the sun, Danny, didn't get to disappear just because the storm was loud. The sun doesn't get days off. In reality, Danny did what he could to keep those bonds alive without tearing apart what had already been rebuilt elsewhere. He didn't storm into Vicky's new life. He didn't disrupt it. He didn't compete with it. There was a subconscious shielding going on, a deliberate restraint, as if he was holding the chaos back with one hand so it didn't spill into her home, her stability, or the lives of those three children. That wasn't weakness. That was dragon restraint. But here's the thing about dogs. They don't leave. And Vicky is a dog, not a snake dog, not a reactive dog, a grounded, watching, remembering dog. Lee, the snake dog, watching from one side, the dog watching from the other. Different energies, different histories, same instinct, protection, scrutiny, boundary. And that changed everything. Danny's parenting couldn't be impulsive. It couldn't be chaotic. It couldn't be performative. Every move mattered. Every word mattered. Because dogs don't miss patterns. They don't forget tone. They don't ignore inconsistency. And dragons, when they are watched by dogs, are forced to evolve, not by conquest, not by fire, by consistency, by showing up again and again without demanding credit, by being warm without burning, by being present without overwhelming. The sun doesn't get to scorch its own garden. It learns to shine just enough. And under that pressure, that dual scrutiny, something rare was happening. Danny wasn't just learning how to be a father. He was learning how to be a stable one. Not because he was told to, not because he was forced, but because the dogs were watching and the children were growing. And this is where it gets important. Because Danny's mom may have gone, but she was never gone. She was still in the soil of ground level. She was the earth itself, the dark, nutrient-rich layer beneath everything, the part you don't see but without which nothing survives. She was in the way the roots spread, in the way the ground held water, in the way the trees didn't topple when the storms came. Ground level wasn't just built on her influence, it was fed by it. Danny, as the sun, did what the sun does. He warmed, he nurtured, he showed up, again and again, steady and unavoidable. Those trees grew because of that, because he planted the seeds, because he stayed, because he learned when to burn and when to soften. The sun teaches strength through consistency, but now the moon was shining too. And the moon doesn't replace the sun. It does something else entirely. The moon glow didn't just help the trees grow. It made them shimmer. It gave them reflection, depth, subtlety, a different kind of nourishment the sun could never provide on its own. Where the sun builds structure and height, the moon shapes inner growth, emotional growth, identity, self-recognition, and somewhere beneath conscious thought, quietly without ceremony, Danny began to understand something fundamental. Any soulmate, any true partner, any moon in the sky had to nourish his children too, not by taking responsibility away from him, not by replacing him, not by overshadowing their mothers, but by being an asset, by encouraging him to be the father he already was, not rescuing him from it, by accepting his children as part of the gravity field, not as baggage, by helping them grow in ways the sun alone could not, emotionally, reflectively, safely. This wasn't the kind of love he'd known before. Those were lessons. Those were storms. Those were collisions designed to teach. This was something else. Real love. If it was going to exist at all, it wasn't just going to need a seat in the Crimson Court. It wasn't just going to need a voice in decision-making, a place in the tower, or proximity to the throne. It was going to need to stand in the garden. It was going to need to respect the soil, support the sun, and cast a moonlight that helped the trees become themselves, not louder, not faster, not stronger, but whole. And Danny didn't realize it yet, not fully, but the pattern had shifted. From conquest to stewardship, from searching for love to recognizing what kind of love could remain. On the inside, Danny was beginning to understand something that had never really made sense to him before. Grief wasn't just loss. Grief was unconditional love, with nowhere to go. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't collapse. It wasn't something to fix or outrun. Inside the mind fortress, grief finally had a function. It softened the sharp edges. It stripped expectation away. It taught him how to love without leverage, without outcome, without bargaining. Grief was love that didn't ask to be returned. And for a dragon, that was a brutal lesson. But outside, Danny wasn't a philosopher or a king or a builder. Outside, he was a grieving son. And that mattered, because no amount of internal architecture can fully shield you from that kind of absence. The world looks different when the person who anchored your origin is gone. The map changes. North disappears. The snake dog by now had faded into the background. Not gone, never gone, but repositioned. The snake dog remained watchful, present through the shared child, observing from the perimeter. No longer the storm, now the boundary, a reminder rather than a force. And with Pip, something new was forming. Not a child-parent dynamic anymore, but a bridge between two people learning who they were becoming. Less rescuing, more walking side by side. A grown-up relationship built on honesty rather than protection. And that left Danny with a question he had never really faced before. What does a dragon do when there is no nest to return to? No ancestral hearth. No guaranteed landing place. No fixed point that says you can rest here now. Dragons are built to roam, yes. But even roaming creatures need somewhere to land when the wings are torn and the storms have passed. For the first time, Danny wasn't fighting for territory. He wasn't defending ground. He wasn't building or burning. He was hovering, suspended between roles, between identities, between past and future. A dragon without a nest isn't defeated, but he is exposed. And in that exposure, something quieter was happening. Something far more important than conquest or collapse. Danny wasn't asking where to go next. He was asking who he was when there was nowhere left to return to. And this is where we return to the dragon. Not the symbol, not the title, not the crown. The dragon clinging to the cliff. Danny is integrating grief, slowly, imperfectly, honestly. He is giving it rooms, letting it breathe, letting it speak without trying to silence it or weaponize it. Grief is no longer an invader there. It's becoming part of the structure. But in reality, Danny is not coping. He is surviving the way he always has when the ground disappears beneath him. Alcohol, women, projects that consume him, conflicts that give him something to push against, chaos that feels familiar enough to stand inside. In reality, Danny is fragmented, reactive, moving fast so he doesn't have to feel how still everything else has become. He isn't walking forward. He's circling old patterns because at least they have edges he recognizes. This isn't progress. This is momentum without direction. This is a man who has lost his anchor and is reaching for anything that feels like weight. And yet, cosmically, on the other side of all of this, the dragon is still there. Claws dug into stone, wings shredded from the climb, muscles burning past endurance. And the truth is brutal now. It hurts far more to keep holding on than it would to let go. Every second spent clinging is tearing something else. Every breath is taken through pain. Every attempt to pull upward only dislodges more rock. The ledge isn't saving him anymore. It's slowly killing him, and still, he won't let go because the fear of the unknown is louder than the pain of the present. The dragon tells himself that if he releases his grip, he won't fall into freedom. He'll fall into something worse. Darkness, oblivion, meaninglessness, a void without form or ground or air. This is the lie gravity tells creatures who have never trusted it. The dragon has survived by fighting storms, burning past through chaos, overpowering resistance. Letting go feels like failure, like surrender, like death. But this isn't a fall caused by weakness. This is the moment before transformation. The cliff has taught him everything it can. The climb is over. There is no higher handhold, no clever maneuver left, no strength remaining that won't destroy him if he uses it. What the dragon doesn't know yet, what he cannot see from the cliff face, is that gravity is not his enemy. It is an invitation, not to fall into something worse, not to be punished, not to disappear, but to pass through something he has never allowed himself to experience before. Not control, not conquest, not survival, release. And the universe is holding its breath, not waiting to see if he falls, but waiting to see if, for the first time in his life, the dragon chooses to trust what comes after letting go. Because holding on meant holding on to something that wasn't there anymore. Not as it was, not as it'd been remembered, not as it could ever be again. Even the family Danny grew up inside of had shifted. Closed ranks, tightened. A stronger, more cohesive dynamic formed in the wake of loss. The tiger mother, Danny's mom, had been the gravitational center, and when she was gone, the rest of them aligned around that absence with a kind of brutal efficiency. Chinese Zodiac compatible in a way that made sense only after the fact. They held each other. They stabilized. And that's the part that hurts the most. Without Danny's mom there, Danny's family didn't need Danny, but Danny still needed his mom. That imbalance matters, because when love is no longer reciprocal, holding on becomes self-destruction. You're gripping air, and when that happens, Chaos doesn't ask permission anymore. Chaos intervenes. This time it didn't come disguised as fate or lessons or cosmic poetry. It came wearing familiar faces, ones Danny knew too well, ones that had always been circling the edges of his life, even back when they were kids. His sheep sister, the older twin, the one who used to strike matches just to see who would look. Only now, she wasn't flicking sparks for attention. She was lighting fires, setting controlled burns, turning sparks into explosions, gathering people around her, her own little posse, her own echo chamber, feeding them stories, feeding them grievances, feeding them just enough truth twisted sideways to make it dangerous. And suddenly there was a hunt, not symbolic, not metaphorical, a hunt. The dragon on the cliff was no longer just falling. He was being tracked, watched, surrounded. The intention wasn't to teach, it wasn't to transform, it wasn't even to win, it was to finish him. And this is where it needs to be said clearly. This wasn't some elegant, universal lesson being delivered with meaning and balance. This was human chaos. This was history catching up. This began when they were kids. It could have gone 100 different ways. There were dozens of dominoes set across years, different paths, different choices, different people who could have become this role, different circumstances that might have diffused it, redirected it, softened it. Any one of those could have changed the outcome. But this is the line the pattern happened to take. This is the version where Kay became the match, the fuel and the voice. This is the version where her merry men found purpose in pursuit. This is the version where chaos decided not to teach, but to execute. And the dragon, already wounded, already grieving, already clinging to a cliff that no longer belonged to him, now had to face something worse than gravity. Intent. Not cosmic intent, not karmic necessity, human intent. And that kind of chaos doesn't care whether you're ready to fall or not. It only cares whether you're still breathing when it reaches you. And this is the moment. This is the breath everyone holds without realizing they're holding it. Because this isn't where the dragon just lets go and disappears into the dark. This isn't surrender. This isn't collapse. This isn't tragedy. This is the fucking turn. This is the instant where everything that looked like defeat reveals itself as positioning. The dragon stops clawing, stops scraping bone against rock, stops tearing his own wings apart, trying to climb back to something that doesn't exist anymore. He pushes away from the cliff, not falling, choosing to leave it. Now there's no ledge, no wall, no illusion of safety. Now he's free falling, battered wings, cracked ribs, smoke in his lungs, and still he flies. One last flight, not to escape, not to hide, but to finish the move. This is the dragon's final play. Burn it all, not in panic, not in madness, in clarity. He turns and breathes fire, not outward at the world, but through it. Anything that no longer belongs gets incinerated. The alcohol, burned. The chasing, burned. The endless projects used to avoid stillness, burned. The habits that once kept him alive but now keep him stuck, burned. Relationships that drain instead of anchor, burned. Bridges that only lead back to old wars, burned. Family ties that exist only in obligation and guilt, burned. Gone. Not in hatred, in release. The War Council isn't raging blindly here. It's judging. Cold, decisive, absolute. Anything marked enemy, anything that keeps him fractured, scattered, clawing, goes up in flame. The children stay untouched. They're protected, rooted in the garden, safe. Everyone else, ash. And here's the thing. This fire isn't destruction in the way the world understands it. It's purification. What's left isn't rubble. It's space, a blank external canvas. Smoke clears. The chessboard is gone. The pieces are gone. The game is gone. No more moves, no more opponents, no more strategies built around survival. Just quiet. And for the first time in a long, brutal cosmic stretch of time, the dragon doesn't need to fight, doesn't need to plan, doesn't need to prove anything. He lands. Not as king, not as weapon, not as myth, as himself. And finally, amongst the heat of chaos, the dragon didn't melt down. He forged up.